The music thumped through the grand hall, chandeliers dripping crystal light across hundreds of guests dressed in shimmering designer gowns and polished tuxedos. Waiters glided between the crowd like whispers, balancing trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. And me? I stood near the massive entrance, my heart pounding so loudly I could hardly hear the music. The dress I wore, soft lilac, faded at the hem, clung awkwardly to my frame. It wasn't even a real designer knockoff. It was a clearance find at a small outlet 2 towns over, a desperate last-minute choice because every dollar I had was needed for rent and groceries, not luxury. I shouldn't have come. But this was my little sister's wedding, her big day, and despite everything, I wanted to be there. I smoothed down the wrinkled fabric nervously, trying to smile as people's gazes slid past me like I was invisible. And then, the words hit me like a slap. "You're a disgrace to this family. A complete failure." The voice, sharp and cold, sliced through the laughter and conversation like a blade. Heads turned. Conversations froze. A slow, uncomfortable silence spread across the room like an oil spill. I turned to face my stepmother, Darlene. Her manicured hand gestured at me with open disgust, sparkling diamond bracelets jingling on her wrist. "Couldn't even bother to dress decently for your own sister's wedding?" she sneered, her voice dripping with mock pity. "My God, look at her, everyone. She's wearing a cheap dress to this." The guests, relatives, business partners, old neighbors, chuckled uncomfortably, some nudging each other, exchanging amused glances. My father, standing rigidly beside Darlene in his tailored Armani suit, didn't defend me. He didn't even blink. Instead, he nodded grimly and muttered, "Should have known. She's always been an embarrassment." The ground under my heels felt like it was tilting. My hands curled into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms to stop the tears from rising. "Not here. Not now." I forced a tight, almost brittle smile and took a step back, away from their circle of judgment. The clinking glasses, the bouquet toss, the laughter, it all blurred together in a dizzying whirl. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. I turned, ready to leave, ready to disappear, when the double doors burst open behind me with a bang that startled everyone into silence. A sharp gust of night air swept into the hall, rippling dresses and extinguishing a few candles. Every single head turned toward the entrance. The music died, and standing there, illuminated by the golden chandelier lights, was a man. Tall, dark-haired, in a crisp navy suit that looked tailor-made to perfection. Sharp jawline, piercing eyes that scanned the room with the focus of someone used to being obeyed. And when his gaze landed on me, everything changed. He moved toward me, cutting through the crowd like a knife through butter. People instinctively moved aside, without even realizing it. I stood frozen, my breath caught somewhere between shock and confusion. He stopped directly in front of me. The entire room held its breath. Then, slowly, he smiled, a smile that could have melted glaciers, and without a second of hesitation, he reached out and took my hand in his. "There you are," he said, his voice low and warm, like velvet laced with steel. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Gasps echoed around the hall. My stepmother's face paled. My father's mouth dropped open slightly, confusion etched into his features. The man turned toward the stunned audience, his arm slipping casually but firmly around my waist. "For those of you who don't know," he said calmly, his voice carrying easily across the stunned silence, "this remarkable woman is the co-founder of the charity that has changed thousands of lives, including mine. And starting today, she's also the newest major shareholder in my company." More gasps. Someone dropped a champagne glass. It shattered on the marble floor with a delicate, almost poetic crash. I blinked, dizzy. What is happening? The man turned back to me, his smile softening. "I thought today would be the perfect day to surprise you," he said, pulling out a small, velvet box from his jacket pocket. Not a ring, but a key. A golden key, encrusted with tiny diamonds. "To your new home. To your new life." The crowd was utterly silent. And somewhere in the frozen crowd, My stepmother, the woman who had humiliated me without blinking, swayed slightly, gripping my father's arm for balance. She had no idea this man was the secret billionaire everyone in town gossiped about. The one whose donations funded hospitals, schools, community centers, and whose face was never publicly shown. She had just humiliated someone he had been watching and cherishing for a long time. The world around me seemed to slow, as if the very air had thickened. I could feel every stunned pair of eyes drilling into my back, every dropped jaw, every tremor of whispered shock snaking through the crowd. The billionaire, my billionaire, though I still couldn't fully grasp it, gently squeezed my hand. And somehow, that touch grounded me. I swallowed hard and lifted my chin, feeling an unexpected strength ripple through me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one shrinking back. From the corner of my eye, I saw Darlene, my stepmother, clawing at her necklace like it was suddenly strangling her. My father stood rigid, blinking rapidly, as if trying to reboot his reality. The billionaire turned toward them, toward all of them, and gave a small, polite nod. "I believe," he said smoothly, his voice filled with something that wasn't anger, but something even sharper. "Power controlled by kindness. There's been a misunderstanding tonight." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of his words crashed through the room like a silent tidal wave. "You see," he continued, his arm never leaving my waist, "you judged someone without knowing her worth, without even trying to." Several guests shifted uncomfortably. A few of them, the ones who had laughed earlier, suddenly found the floor very fascinating. My father opened his mouth, closed it. He tried again. We didn't mean." His voice cracked like dry wood under pressure. The billionaire simply smiled, utterly unfazed. "It's easy to laugh at someone when you don't see the battles they've fought in silence," he said, now scanning the whole room, his voice rich with quiet conviction. "Easier to mock from the balcony than to climb into the arena yourself." I could see my sister, the bride, standing near the champagne fountain, her mouth slightly ajar, bouquet drooping in her hand. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody dared to laugh now. The billionaire turned to me again, his expression softening like sunrise after a storm. "Come on," he whispered. "Let's go somewhere where you're celebrated, not tolerated." And just like that, he led me, gently but firmly, through the still-parted crowd toward the doors. We hadn't even made it halfway across the floor when Darlene stumbled forward, desperate now, her voice a brittle screech under the shimmering chandeliers. "Wait. Please, we didn't mean it. She's family." Her fake smile trembled at the corners, cracking like old porcelain. "Stay. You belong with us." The audacity. The sudden whiplash of fake affection. I felt something cold and final click inside me, like a door I had been too afraid to close for years finally shutting, quietly but permanently. I turned slightly, just enough for her to see my face, calm, unshaken. "Thank you," I said softly. "But I think I finally understand." I let the sentence hang there, unfinished, a soft, cutting finality in the air. Family isn't where you're tolerated. It's where you're loved. Then I turned back and walked out of the hall, my hand steady in the billionaire's warm grasp. Behind me, the heavy golden doors swung closed with a muted boom that felt like punctuation on a chapter one would never reread. Outside, the cool night air kissed my face. Stars shimmered overhead like scattered diamonds across velvet. The billionaire led me to a sleek, black Rolls-Royce parked right at the entrance, its presence understated, yet impossibly luxurious. He opened the door for me like a gentleman from another world. As I slid inside, the leather seat cradled me in a way no house, no family gathering ever had. When he got in beside me, he didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he turned toward me, his eyes soft but serious. "You never needed them to tell you your worth," he said. "You were brilliant all along. You just needed someone who saw it too." And for the first time in what felt like forever, my throat tightened not from shame or anger, but from gratitude. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice breaking just slightly. He smiled, a smile that melted every leftover shard of hurt inside me. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your success, he said. Least of all those who only knew how to measure it by designer dresses and hollow applause. He leaned back, finally starting the car. As the engine purred softly, he reached over and squeezed my hand once more. From now on, you walk into every room knowing exactly who you are, he said, voice low and fierce. And trust me, they'll be the ones scrambling to keep up with you. The city lights blurred into rivers of gold outside the windows as we drove into the future, one where I was no longer the family's invisible shame. I was finally unstoppable. The car glided through the city, passing glowing skyscrapers and sleepy cafes. I leaned my head against the window, watching the streets blur past, my heart still racing. For so long, I had convinced myself that kindness meant staying quiet, that loving my family meant accepting their cruelty. But tonight proved something different. Where are we going? I asked quietly. The billionaire, his name was Ethan, smiled without taking his eyes off the road. Somewhere that feels like home, he said. You'll see. 20 minutes later, we pulled into a quiet, gated property. Towering trees lined the driveway, and at the end stood a beautiful house, elegant, warm, with golden lights spilling from the windows. This is yours, Ethan said as he parked. I stared at him, confused. What do you mean? I can't. You earned it, he interrupted gently. Everything you've done for others, everything you fought through, it's time you had something that's truly yours. He wasn't trying to rescue me. He wasn't pitying me. He was recognizing me. We stepped inside the house. The living room smelled faintly of fresh flowers. Soft rugs, tall bookshelves, cozy armchairs. It felt nothing like the cold mansions my stepmother adored. It felt alive. It felt safe. Take your time, Ethan said. You're home now. I wandered through the house, touching the soft fabrics, the polished wood. Tears blurred my vision, but this time they weren't from humiliation. I was finally standing somewhere I belonged. That night, as I lay in the softest bed I'd ever felt, Ethan sent a short message to my phone. Proud of you. Always will be. I clutched the phone to my chest and smiled through the tears. For once, my story wasn't about proving myself to people who refused to see me. It was about finally seeing myself. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, warm and golden. I sat at the small kitchen table, sipping coffee from a handmade ceramic mug. The world felt quieter today, not empty, but peaceful.
My phone buzzed again.
A message from Ethan. There's something happening today you might want to see. Wear something you love. Curious, I opened the closet he'd stocked for me. Simple, elegant clothes that actually felt like me, not like a desperate imitation of someone else. I chose a soft cream dress, light and flowing, and slipped into a pair of comfortable heels. When the car pulled up outside, it wasn't just Ethan inside. It was his personal assistant too, holding a neat portfolio. Ready? Ethan asked, flashing that easy, grounding smile. For what? I laughed nervously. For your new chapter, he said simply. We drove downtown and pulled up in front of a building I'd seen 100 times before, an old community center my stepmother had once sneered at for being full of charity cases. Banners were strung across the entrance today. Grand reopening, under new ownership. My heart hammered as Ethan guided me through the doors. Inside, news cameras flashed. Local reporters whispered excitedly. And standing in the middle of it all was a polished plaque mounted on the wall. It read, dedicated to my name, for her unseen battles, her quiet victories, and her endless kindness. The room spun for a second. I grabbed Ethan's arm to steady myself. You did this. I whispered. No, he said quietly. You did. I just made sure the world finally saw it. The mayor shook my hand. Kids from the local shelters beamed at me. Volunteers, real, kind, genuine people, clapped and cheered. I wasn't a disgrace. I wasn't invisible. I was a cornerstone. And just when I thought my heart couldn't hold any more, the doors at the back of the room creaked open. My father and stepmother stepped inside, looking bewildered, out of place. They saw the plaque. They saw the crowd. They saw me. My stepmother's face crumbled. She tried to approach, her expression shifting from confusion to desperate apology. My father just looked small, like a man who realized too late he had gambled and lost something irreplaceable. Ethan stepped back, giving me the space to choose. I met their eyes, not with anger, not with hatred, but with calm. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said quietly. "But you won't find it in tearing others down." Then I turned back to the people who were clapping, smiling, celebrating, the people who saw me not as an accessory to flaunt or a failure to shame, but simply me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't look back. Weeks passed, but something inside me had shifted permanently. I was no longer waiting for someone else's approval to feel worthy. The community center thrived under my leadership. Programs for kids, workshops for women starting over, evening classes for the elderly, all the things I had once wished for when I felt invisible. Now, I was building them. Every morning when I unlocked the glass doors, a little crowd of smiles waited for me. Real smiles. Real gratitude. Not the cold, transactional affection I used to chase from my family. One afternoon, as I finished setting up a new library corner, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting a volunteer. It was Ethan. He wore jeans and a casual white button-down today, sleeves rolled up, a soft grin tugging at his lips. "You missed our lunch date," he teased lightly. "I'm sorry," I said, wiping dust off my hands. "I lost track of time." He chuckled and walked over, brushing a stray curl from my forehead like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I'm proud of you," he said, voice quiet. "Not because of what you built, but because you remembered who you are." I smiled, feeling tears sting my eyes. "You saw it first," I whispered. He shook his head.
No.
"I just reminded you." We stood there for a moment, surrounded by shelves of new books and the laughter of kids down the hallway. "There's something else," Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. My heart skipped. Not a ring. Not yet, but a small card. "The board of my company voted last night," he said, handing it to me. "They want you on it. Officially." I stared at the card. My name. My title. Board member. I laughed. A bright, unrestrained laugh that felt like a weight lifting off my chest. "Are you sure?" I asked, half joking. "I've never been more sure of anything," he said, eyes twinkling. "They need someone who knows what real strength looks like." I took the card, holding it carefully, like a fragile promise. At that moment I knew. I wasn't stepping into someone else's world anymore. I was creating my own. That night, as the sun set in blazing gold across the city skyline, I stood on the balcony of my new home. The same stepmother who once called me a disgrace was now nothing but a distant shadow in my story. The laughter that had once mocked me was a fading echo I no longer needed to silence. I didn't need revenge. I had something better. Victory with kindness. And as Ethan joined me on the balcony, slipping his hand into mine, I realized something deeper than success. True wealth was never measured by what you wore or who clapped the loudest. It was measured by who stood beside you when the lights faded, who believed in you when no one was watching, who celebrated you, even when you had nothing to offer but yourself. And tonight, standing under a sky full of stars, I was the richest woman in the world.
The laughter hit me like a slap to the face. Not the warm, joyful kind that echoed in shared memories, but the cold, cruel kind that cut deeper than words. My sister, Charlotte, tossed her champagne glass from hand to hand as she smirked at the man standing beside me. "Daniel. He's—" "What, exactly?" she asked, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of nearby guests at my family's annual gala. "Jobless? Oh, Emma, darling, you could have aimed higher. A guy like him? What are you even thinking?" The sting of her words was sharp, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I tightened my grip on Daniel's arm. He stood tall, calm, and composed. So composed it only seemed to fuel Charlotte's mockery. The silk dress I wore felt suffocating as I glanced around the room. The elite crowd buzzed with whispers. their jeweled smiles hiding venomous words. My father joined in, a dismissive laugh rumbling from his chest. Charlotte, don't be so harsh. He's probably working on himself. The pause was deliberate, dripping with sarcasm. Daniel's lips twitched ever so slightly, a restrained smile that I knew meant he was about to handle this with far more grace than they deserved. Well, he said evenly, if working on myself means building something meaningful, then yes. That's exactly what I'm doing. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. Meaningful? How noble. Her laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. But don't you think Emma deserves more? Stability, for starters? Or is that asking too much? Before I could reply, my mother chimed in, her tone as sweet and toxic as honey. Emma, darling, you've always had such a big heart. But love isn't enough to build a future. A husband needs to bring something to the table. That's enough, I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. The room fell silent, eyes darting toward us like vultures circling a fresh kill. You don't know Daniel. And frankly, your approval isn't required. Charlotte gasped, her hand flying to her chest like I'd slapped her. My father's face darkened, and my mother exchanged a pointed look with him. But Daniel? He leaned in closer to me and whispered, it's okay. Let them talk. Their words don't define us. I couldn't stand it any longer. Grabbing Daniel's hand, I led him out of the suffocating room. My heels clicked against the marble floor as we made our way to the grand entrance. As the heavy doors swung open, the cool night air hit my face like a lifeline. I'm sorry, I blurted, turning to him. I'm so sorry they treated you like that. You don't need to apologize for them, Daniel said softly. I'm used to people like that. That doesn't make it okay, I said, my voice cracking. You deserve better. They don't see what I see. He smiled, the kind of smile that could melt walls. Emma, I'm not trying to impress them. I'm here for you. And as long as you're by my side, I don't care what they think. His words were a balm to my wounded heart, but I couldn't shake the anger simmering beneath the surface. My family's wealth and status had always been a barrier between us, but tonight, they'd taken it too far. As we drove away from the estate, the car filled with silence. I glanced at Daniel, his profile illuminated by the faint glow of the dashboard. Despite the humiliation he'd endured, he looked calm, even determined. What are you thinking? I asked quietly. That I'll prove them wrong, he said simply. What my family didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was how hard Daniel worked. While they lounged in luxury, attending galas and sipping champagne, Daniel spent countless nights hunched over his laptop in his small apartment. His project was ambitious, revolutionary even, a platform that could bring advanced education to underprivileged communities through AI technology. It wasn't glamorous work. There were no instant rewards, no flashy accolades. Just long hours, sleepless nights, and an unshakable belief in his vision. I watched him struggle, his face lit only by the glow of his computer screen. There were nights when he looked defeated, when the weight of his dream seemed too heavy to bear. But even then, he never gave up. Why do you do it? I asked him one night as we sat on his worn-out couch, a half-eaten pizza between us. Because it matters, he said, his voice steady. Because I want to create something that lasts. Something that helps people. And what about them? I gestured toward my phone, which buzzed with another disapproving text from my mother. They'll never see it. They'll never understand. He reached over and took my hand. I don't need them to understand. I just need you to believe in me. My family's interference grew more aggressive. Charlotte orchestrated dinners with wealthy suitors, thinly veiled as networking opportunities. My father cornered me in his study, his voice firm and unyielding. Emma, he said, pacing like a lawyer preparing a case, you need to think about your future. Daniel is ambitious, sure, but ambition doesn't pay the bills. Ambition doesn't build a stable life. Neither does arrogance, I snapped, crossing my arms. You're so obsessed with appearances that you can't see what really matters. He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his expression dark. This isn't about appearances. It's about practicality. You're throwing your life away on someone who can't give you what you deserve. What I deserve, I said, my voice trembling with anger, is someone who loves me for who I am, someone who isn't afraid to dream. And that's exactly what I have with Daniel. The tension between me and my family reached a boiling point when they staged what can only be described as an ambush. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon, and I'd been lured to the estate under the pretense of a family meeting. The moment I stepped into the living room, I realized something was wrong. The entire family was there. My parents, Charlotte, even a few cousins I hadn't seen in years. They sat in a semicircle, their expressions a mix of concern and judgment. My mother stood in the center, wringing her hands like an actress rehearsing a monologue. What's going on? I asked, narrowing my eyes. Emma, my mother began, her voice tinged with dramatic sorrow. We're worried about you. About the choices you're making. What choices? I demanded, though I already knew where this was headed. Daniel, Charlotte chimed in, crossing her legs and leaning back like she was in charge. He's not right for you. Everyone can see it. We're just trying to save you from a mistake. A mistake, I repeated, my voice rising. You don't even know him. You've decided he's beneath us because he doesn't come from money. That's all this is. Darling, it's not just about money, my father interjected, though his tone made it clear that money was very much the issue. It's about stability, security. Daniel may be ambitious, but ambition without results is just a pipe dream. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. You have no idea how hard he's working. He's building something incredible, something that will change lives. Charlotte snorted. Oh, please. Building what? A house of cards? Emma, you're deluding yourself. Love doesn't pay the bills. I couldn't take it anymore. You're all so obsessed with status that you've forgotten what it means to actually care about someone. Daniel is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and if you can't see that, then maybe you don't know me at all. After the intervention, things between me and my family grew colder. They stopped pretending to be polite when Daniel's name came up, and I stopped pretending to care about their approval. The only thing keeping me sane was Daniel himself. He'd been making progress with his project, but it was a slow and grueling process. Every penny he had went into research, development, and testing. His apartment was littered with prototype sketches and empty coffee cups, and his once clean desk was now a chaotic mess of wires and notebooks. One evening, I found him sitting on the floor, staring at a tangled circuit board. His face was drawn, exhaustion pulling at the corners of his mouth. Daniel, I said softly, kneeling beside him. You need to rest. I can't, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The deadline for the investor's pitch is in 2 weeks, and I'm not ready. If I don't nail this, it's over. I reached out and cupped his face, forcing him to look at me. You're going to nail it. You're the smartest, most determined person I know. But you can't do that if you burn yourself out. He leaned into my touch, closing his eyes. I don't deserve you. You deserve everything, I said firmly. And one day the world will see that, while Daniel and I were fighting our battles, my family was busy plotting. Unbeknownst to me, they'd reached out to one of Daniel's potential investors, an old friend of my father's, and painted him as an unreliable dreamer. The investor, swayed by their words, pulled out of the deal days before the pitch. Daniel was devastated. He didn't say much when he told me, just sat on the couch with his head in his hands. They said they didn't think I could deliver, he muttered. That I was too risky. I felt my heart shatter. I knew exactly who was behind it, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The next morning, I stormed into my father's study, slamming the door behind me. He looked up from his newspaper, his expression calm but wary. What did you do? I demanded. I don't know what you're talking about, he replied, setting his coffee cup down. Don't play dumb, I snapped. You went behind my back and sabotaged Daniel's deal. How could you? Emma, he said, his voice annoyingly calm. I did what I thought was best for you. Daniel isn't ready for the kind of world you live in. I was protecting you. Protecting me? I repeated, my voice trembling with fury. You're not protecting me. You're destroying the one thing in my life that actually makes me happy. Despite the setback, Daniel refused to give up. He poured every ounce of his energy into perfecting his pitch, using the rejection as fuel to push harder. I watched in awe as he transformed his anger into determination, working late into the night and refusing to let failure define him. 3 weeks later, he got another chance. A tech startup competition was being held in the city, offering a massive cash prize and a year of mentorship for the winner. Daniel entered without hesitation, knowing it was his last shot. The night of the competition, I sat in the audience, my heart pounding as Daniel took the stage. He spoke with passion and clarity, explaining his vision for an AI platform that could revolutionize education. The room was silent as he finished, the weight of his words hanging in the air. And then, the applause started. It grew louder and louder, until the entire auditorium was on its feet. Daniel's name was announced as the winner, and I felt tears streaming down my face as he accepted the prize. Daniel's victory at the tech competition was a turning point, not just for him but for us as a couple. Within days, his name was making waves in the tech world. Articles about his innovative AI platform popped up online, and the buzz caught the attention of investors and philanthropists alike. It was as if all his hard work had finally been validated. But while the world celebrated his success, my family's reaction was a mix of stunned silence and reluctant acknowledgement. My mother, always the queen of backhanded compliments, called me one evening. "I saw the article about Daniel in Tech Innovators Weekly," she said, her voice strained. "It's impressive. I suppose we underestimated him." I didn't bother hiding my satisfaction. "Yes, you did." "Well," she continued, "I hope he remembers who supported him through it all." I laughed bitterly. "Supported him? You spent months trying to tear him down. Don't think for a second that you get to take credit for his success." She fell silent, and for once I didn't care about preserving peace. Daniel had earned this, and I wouldn't let anyone diminish his accomplishments. Daniel's rise to prominence culminated in a televised interview with one of the country's top news anchors. The interview aired on a Friday night, and I sat beside him on the couch, clutching his hand as the opening credits rolled. Tonight, we're joined by Daniel Evans, the tech visionary behind EduCAI, the host announced. His groundbreaking platform is already making waves, promising to revolutionize access to education for underprivileged communities around the globe. As the segment unfolded, I watched with pride as Daniel spoke about his journey. He didn't sugarcoat the struggles he'd faced, the sleepless nights, the financial strain, the rejections, but he framed them as stepping stones to success. "I wanted to create something that mattered," he said, his voice steady and heartfelt. "Something that could level the playing field for kids who don't have access to quality education. This isn't just a product for me. It's a mission." The audience in the studio erupted in applause, and I felt a lump rise in my throat. This was the man my family had dismissed as jobless, now being celebrated on national television. The next time Daniel and I visited my family, the dynamic had completely shifted. Instead of the usual cold stares and condescending remarks, we were greeted with awkward smiles and overly warm welcomes. "Daniel," my father exclaimed, extending a hand, "it's good to see you again. I've been reading about your work. Very impressive." "Thank you," Daniel said politely, shaking his hand. "And Emma," my mother added, her tone unusually saccharine. "You must be so proud of him." "I am," I said, my voice cool. "I always have been." As we sat down to dinner, the conversation revolved entirely around Daniel. My parents asked about his plans for the platform, his goals for expansion, and even his thoughts on philanthropy. It was a stark contrast to the disdain they'd shown him before, but Daniel remained gracious, answering their questions without a trace of arrogance. Charlotte, however, couldn't resist slipping in a jab. "So, Daniel," she said, swirling her wine glass, "do you think you'll be able to handle the pressure? Success can be overwhelming." Daniel smiled, unbothered. "I faced worse, and I have Emma by my side, so I think I'll manage." Her smirk faltered, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Daniel had risen above their pettiness, proving once again that he was stronger than their judgments. As Daniel's success continued to grow, so did his impact. EduCAI was launched worldwide, garnering praise from educators, activists, and government leaders alike. It wasn't just a business. It was a movement, a tool that empowered communities and bridged the gap between privilege and poverty. Through it all, Daniel remained humble. He didn't care about fame or accolades. His focus was always on the mission. And as his partner, I couldn't have been prouder. But our journey wasn't without challenges. The demands of his work often kept him away, and there were nights when I missed the simpler times, when it was just the two of us dreaming about the future. Still, we found ways to stay connected. Late-night phone calls, stolen weekends, and quiet moments where we reminded each other why we'd started this journey in the first place. One evening, my father invited us to dinner at the estate. It was supposed to be a celebratory occasion, but I could sense there was something more behind the invitation. As we sat down, he cleared his throat and turned to Daniel. "Daniel," he began, his tone unusually formal, "I want to apologize. I was wrong about you. I didn't see your potential and I judged you unfairly. But seeing what you've accomplished, it's remarkable." Daniel nodded, his expression neutral. "Thank you. I appreciate that. And," my father continued, "I'd like to support your work. If there's anything the Carter family can do, resources, connections, funding, we're here to help." I froze, waiting for Daniel's reaction. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Carter, but I've learned to build things without relying on others. It's what's made me who I am." My father's face reddened slightly, but he nodded, accepting the subtle rejection. For the first time, I saw a flicker of respect in his eyes. Not just for Daniel, but for me, for choosing him. Years later, as Daniel and I stood on the stage of an international conference, accepting an award for his contributions to global education, I looked out at the sea of faces applauding us. My family was in the front row, their expressions a mix of pride and humility. Daniel took the microphone and spoke about the journey we'd been on, thanking the people who'd believed in him when no one else did. Then he turned to me, his voice soft but clear. "And to Emma," he said, his eyes locking with mine, "the woman who stood by me through every setback, every sleepless night, every doubt. I wouldn't be here without you." The crowd erupted into applause, but all I could hear was the sound of my heart, full to bursting with love and pride. Our journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Together, we'd built something extraordinary. Not just a groundbreaking platform, but a life filled with purpose, love, and unshakable belief in each other. And in the end, that was the greatest triumph of all. As Daniel's platform gained traction, so did the pressure. The success brought new challenges, legal hurdles, competition from rival companies, and the grueling demands of scaling his vision globally. Every day seemed like a battle, and some nights, I found him sitting alone in the dark, staring at nothing. "What's wrong?" I asked one night as I sat beside him, his hand limp in mine. "I'm scared, Emma," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I can't handle this? What if it all falls apart?" I cupped his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. "You've faced worse, Daniel. And every time you've come out stronger. You don't have to do this alone." His eyes softened, and he pulled me into a hug. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Just as things seemed to stabilize, disaster struck. A trusted colleague, someone Daniel had mentored, stole key parts of his technology and sold them to a competitor. The betrayal left him reeling, and for days he shut everyone out. "I thought he believed in what we were doing," Daniel said, his voice raw with pain. "I trusted him, Emma." "You'll get through this," I said, though my heart ached for him. "You always do." With renewed determination, Daniel rallied his team, filing a lawsuit against the competitor and doubling down on his efforts to innovate. The legal battle dragged on for months, but Daniel's integrity and resilience shone through. In the end, the court ruled in his favor, restoring his stolen work and solidifying his reputation as a leader who couldn't be undermined. While Daniel fought his battles, I faced my own. My family's attempts to undermine our relationship didn't stop, but something inside me had shifted. I was no longer the meek daughter seeking their approval. I was a woman standing firmly by the man I loved. At a family gathering, my father pulled me aside, his tone heavy with disapproval. Emma, you're wasting your potential. You could be with someone who compliments you, someone who... Stop, I said, my voice firm. I'm not going to listen to this anymore. Daniel is my choice, and he's more of a man than anyone in this room will ever be. If you can't respect that, then maybe it's time I stop coming around. The shock on his face was almost comical, but I didn't wait for his response. For the first time, I felt free. Daniel's work reached a tipping point when he was invited to speak at a global education summit. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to showcase his platform to world leaders, philanthropists, and innovators. As he stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. His voice, steady and passionate, filled the space as he spoke about the power of technology to transform lives. He shared stories of children in remote villages accessing education for the first time, of families breaking the cycle of poverty through learning. The applause was deafening. As he walked off the stage, I ran to him, tears streaming down my face. You did it, I whispered, hugging him tightly. We did it, he corrected, his voice full of emotion. Years later, as we stood together at the grand opening of a new EDUCAI center, I couldn't help but reflect on how far we'd come. The center was bustling with children and families, their laughter and chatter filling the air. Daniel turned to me, his eyes full of gratitude. None of this would have been possible without you. I smiled, tears threatening to spill. You've always had it in you, Daniel. I just helped you see it. As we stood there, hand in hand, I realized that our journey had been about more than proving people wrong or achieving success. It had been about love, resilience, and the belief that together we could overcome anything. The nurse's lounge smelled faintly of burnt coffee and antiseptic. It was a small, windowless space where we'd gather during brief breaks, the fluorescent lights doing nothing to soften the sharp edges of the conversations inside. Tonight, as always, I was their favorite target. St. Rachel, Brenda drawled, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Off to room 507 again, I bet. You're really committed to that diaper-changing gig, aren't you? The other nurses burst out laughing, and I clenched my clipboard tighter. I was used to their mockery, but tonight it stung a little more than usual. It had been a grueling 12-hour shift, and my patience was wearing thin. Maybe she's hoping he'll wake up and sweep her off her feet. Another nurse chimed in, her tone laced with sarcasm. A real Cinderella story, right? Except he's a vegetable. More laughter. My stomach twisted, but I didn't react. That's what they wanted, for me to lash out, to give them more fuel for their ridicule. Instead, I adjusted my ponytail, squared my shoulders, and walked out of the lounge without a word. The hallway was quiet, the hum of monitors and the soft shuffle of footsteps the only sounds. I made my way to room 507, my steps steady despite the ache in my feet. I couldn't afford to falter. Not here. Not for him. Room 507 had become my sanctuary and my burden all at once. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, the faint scent of antiseptic lingering despite my constant efforts to make the space feel less clinical. Daniel Grant lay motionless on the bed, his once powerful frame now frail and dependent on the machines keeping him alive. He wasn't just another patient to me. Daniel's file had caught my attention the moment he arrived. The photos showed a man in his prime, confident, successful, and larger than life. But the accident had changed everything. His car had been found crushed against a tree, the result of a late-night drive gone wrong. The details were hazy, but the damage was clear. A fractured skull, multiple broken bones, and a coma that had persisted for months. Most of the staff had written him off as a lost cause. To them, he was just another bed to fill, another chart to update. But to me, he was a human being, a man who deserved dignity, even if he couldn't ask for it. "Good evening, Mr. Grant," I said softly as I entered the room. It was a habit I'd developed early on, speaking to him as though he could hear me. Maybe he could. Maybe he couldn't. It didn't matter. I began my routine, checking his vitals, adjusting his fore, and ensuring his feeding tube was secure. Then came the harder part, cleaning him and changing his linens. It was thankless work, the kind that drew mockery from my colleagues. But I didn't care. As I worked, I spoke to him. You know, they think I'm crazy for doing this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I think they're wrong. I think you're still in there somewhere. And I think you're going to wake up one day and prove them all wrong. The machines beeped softly in response, their rhythm steady and unchanging. I smiled to myself, imagining what it would be like if he could answer. Until then, I said, smoothing the blanket over his chest, you've got me. Weeks passed, and the routine continued. Room 507 became my refuge, a place where I could escape the snide comments and the toxic atmosphere of the nurses' lounge. But even I had moments of doubt. Was I wasting my time? Was it foolish to care so deeply for someone who might never wake up? Those questions haunted me, but I pushed them aside. And then, one quiet evening, everything changed. I was adjusting his blanket when I noticed it, a faint twitch in his hand. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But then it happened again. Mr. Grant, I whispered, my heart pounding. Can you hear me? If you can, try to move your fingers. Seconds passed. Just as I began to doubt myself, his fingers curled ever so slightly. My breath caught in my throat. Oh my God, I murmured. You're waking up. I pressed the call button, summoning the doctor and a team of nurses. The room filled with people, the air buzzing with urgency as they assessed his condition. But all I could focus on was the faint, steady pressure of his hand in mine. He was coming back. Daniel's recovery was slow, but it was happening. Day by day, he regained strength, his body responding to therapy in ways the doctors hadn't thought possible. By the end of the second week, he was speaking in short, raspy sentences. Rachel, he said one afternoon, his voice weak but unmistakable. It was the first time he'd spoken my name, and the sound of it sent a shiver down my spine. Yes, Mr. Grant? I asked, my voice trembling. Thank you, he said simply, his eyes locking onto mine, for not giving up on me. Tears blurred my vision, but I blinked them away. You're welcome, I said softly. I'm just glad you're back. Daniel's recovery sent shockwaves through the hospital. Word of his progress spread quickly, and so did the growing attention on room 507. Nurses who had once avoided him like the plague now lingered by the door, their curiosity barely concealed. I tried to ignore the stares and whispers as I walked into his room. Daniel was sitting up for the first time, his posture still weak but undeniably different. His once pale, lifeless face was now filled with determination, though his body bore the scars of his ordeal. Good morning, Mr. Grant, I said, setting down my clipboard. Daniel, he corrected, his voice raspy but firm. Please call me Daniel. Okay, I said with a small smile. How are you feeling today, Daniel? Better, he replied. Because of you. I hesitated, unsure how to respond. Gratitude was one thing, but there was something in his tone that made my heart skip a beat. He didn't just sound thankful, he sounded sincere. I was just doing my job, I said finally, avoiding his gaze as I adjusted his fore. No, he said, his voice sharper now. It was more than that. I know what they said about me, what they said about you. I froze. What do you mean? He let out a slow breath. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. But I could hear. Everything. My heart pounded in my chest as his words sank in. He'd heard it all, the laughter, the mockery, the cruel things my colleagues had said. Heat rushed to my cheeks as I thought of all the times I'd poured my heart out to him, thinking he was oblivious. I'm sorry, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. Don't be, he said. You were the only one who treated me like a person. I owe you everything. The day Daniel's full identity became known was the day the hospital turned on its head. It started with a routine news segment playing in the waiting room, a special report on Daniel Grant's recovery. That's him, one of the nurses exclaimed, pointing at the screen. That's the guy in 507. The room erupted into chaos as the staff scrambled to confirm what they were seeing. Daniel Grant wasn't just a patient, he was a billionaire, the CEO of one of the most powerful conglomerates in the country. His accident had made national headlines, and now his recovery was making waves. Brenda, of course, was the first to jump on the bandwagon. I always knew there was something special about him, she gushed to anyone who would listen. I mean, I practically spent all my free time in his room. I rolled my eyes but said nothing. Let her spin her stories. Daniel knew the truth, and that was all that mattered. A week later, I found a sleek black envelope waiting for me at the nurse's station. My name was written in elegant gold script, and inside was an invitation. Dinner at Daniel's estate. I stared at the card, my emotions a whirlwind of confusion and apprehension. Why would he invite me? What could I possibly say to him outside the sterile confines of the hospital? Looks like someone's moving up in the world, Brenda sneered, snatching the card from my hands. She read it aloud, her voice dripping with mockery. Dinner with Daniel Grant. How fancy. Guess he really likes charity cases. I snatched the card back, my face burning. Grow up, Brenda. Her laughter followed me as I walked away, but I didn't let it deter me. I had a decision to make. Daniel's estate was breathtaking. A sprawling mansion surrounded by meticulously manicured gardens. I felt like I was stepping into another world as I walked up the marble steps, my nerves jangling with every step. The butler greeted me at the door, leading me to a dining room that looked like it belonged in a palace. Daniel was already there, dressed in a tailored suit, his presence commanding despite his recent recovery. "Rachel," he said, standing to greet me. "Thank you for coming." I offered a nervous smile as I took my seat. "This is incredible. Thank you for inviting me." "You deserve it," he said simply. "I owe you so much." The dinner that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The food was exquisite, the conversation easy and natural. Daniel spoke about his life before the accident, his rise to success, and the challenges he'd faced along the way. But what struck me most was his vulnerability. "Do you know what it's like," he said, his voice tinged with pain, "to have everything taken away in an instant? To be trapped in your own body, unable to fight back?" I nodded, my throat tight. "I can't imagine how hard that must have been." It was, he admitted. But what hurt more was realizing how many people saw me as nothing. Just another task. "Except you. You gave me dignity when I had none." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. "You deserved it," I said softly. "Everyone does." As the night went on, Daniel's tone shifted. "I've been thinking a lot about what's next," he said, swirling his wine glass. "Not just for me, but for you." "For me?" I asked, taken aback. He nodded. "You believed in me when no one else did. I want to return the favor. Come work for me, Rachel. Name your price. Whatever you want, it's yours." I stared at him, my mind racing. "Daniel, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said simply. "You're not just a nurse, you're a leader, and I want you by my side." The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. Daniel's offer lingered in my mind like a beacon, equal parts exhilarating and terrifying. Working for him meant leaving the hospital, the only place I'd ever known professionally. It also meant stepping into a world I didn't fully understand, one of wealth, power, and influence. Brenda and the others were relentless, their bitterness bubbling to the surface. "She thinks she's too good for this place now," Brenda spat one afternoon. "Can't wait to see her fall flat on her face." Their words no longer had the power to wound me, but they fueled my determination. If I was going to leave, I would do it on my terms, with no regrets. That night, I called Daniel. "Rachel," he answered, his voice warm and steady. "I wasn't sure you'd call. I've been thinking about your offer," I said, my heart pounding. "And I'm in." The pause that followed was brief, but I could hear the smile in his voice when he replied, "Good. You won't regret it." The transition was overwhelming at first. Daniel wasted no time introducing me to his world. A world of boardrooms, private jets, and high-stakes decisions. He insisted that I oversee the launch of his new foundation, which aimed to revolutionize patient care across the country. "You're the heart of this project," he said during one of our meetings. "It's your compassion that inspired it." While the work was challenging, it was also deeply rewarding. For the first time, I felt like I was making a real difference, not just in one hospital, but on a much larger scale. But not everyone was happy about my success. It started with small things. anonymous emails questioning my qualifications, whispers of favoritism spreading through the hospital. I knew Brenda was behind it, but I had no proof. Then, one day, Daniel called me into his office. "Rachel," he said, his tone serious. "We need to talk." My stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were screenshots of messages Brenda had sent to a local journalist, accusing me of exploiting Daniel for personal gain. My hands trembled as I read the accusations. "She's trying to destroy me." Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes blazing with anger. "She won't succeed." Daniel's legal team moved swiftly, gathering evidence of Brenda's misconduct. Her history of negligence, falsified records, and petty sabotage came to light in brutal detail. Within weeks, she was fired, her reputation in ruins. But Daniel wasn't done. At his insistence, the hospital implemented sweeping reforms, ensuring that patients received better care and that staff members like Brenda could no longer thrive in toxic environments. It was a victory not just for me, but for every patient who had been treated as less than human. As the foundation grew, so did my relationship with Daniel. We spent long hours working together, our shared passion for the project deepening our connection. He was no longer just the man I had cared for. He was my partner in every sense of the word. One evening, as we reviewed plans for a new facility, he looked at me with an intensity that made my heart race. "You've changed my life, Rachel," he said softly. "Not just with the foundation. With everything." I felt a lump form in my throat. "You've changed mine too." The silence that followed was charged with unspoken emotion. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what it would be like to let him in, to trust him not just as a colleague but as something more. Months later, the foundation's first facility opened its doors. The event was a triumph, drawing media attention and praise from all sides. Daniel insisted on giving me full credit, his speech a heartfelt tribute to my dedication and compassion. As the applause faded, he turned to me, his eyes shining. "I couldn't have done this without you." I smiled, my heart full. We did it together. Looking back, it's hard to believe how much had changed. I'd gone from being the butt of every joke in the nurses' lounge to leading a nationwide movement that was transforming lives. But the most important change wasn't in my career. It was in me. I'd found my voice, my strength, and my purpose. And I'd found Daniel, the man who had shown me that kindness and courage could change the world. Despite the foundation's early success, doubt began to creep into my mind. The expectations were enormous, and I often felt out of my depth. Late nights in the office became my routine, poring over plans and budgets, trying to make sense of a world that felt foreign. Daniel noticed. "You're working yourself to death," he said one evening, finding me in the foundation's office long after everyone else had left. He placed a cup of tea on the desk beside me. "Talk to me. What's going on?" I sighed, leaning back in my chair. I don't want to let you down." "You could never let me down," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Rachel, you've already done more than I could have hoped for. This foundation is what it is because of you." His words were reassuring, but the weight of responsibility still pressed heavy on my shoulders. I wanted to succeed not for myself but for him, for everything he'd given me. Just as I began to find my footing, the foundation became the target of a vicious media campaign. Anonymous sources accused us of mismanaging funds, claiming that I was unqualified and out of my league. The headlines were brutal, from nurse to fraud, Rachel's rapid rise under fire. The accusations were baseless, but the damage was done. Donors began pulling out, and the board questioned my leadership. I felt like the walls were closing in. Daniel was livid. "We're going to fight this," he said, pacing his office. "They don't get to tear you down because they're afraid of what you've accomplished." But I wasn't so sure. "Maybe they're right," I whispered. "Maybe I don't belong here." Daniel stopped, his expression fierce. "Don't you dare say that. You belong here more than anyone, and we're going to prove it." With Daniel's support, I decided to take control of the narrative. I agreed to a live interview, something I'd never imagined doing. The cameras were intimidating, and my hands shook as I adjusted the microphone. "Why did you start this foundation?" the interviewer asked, her tone skeptical. I took a deep breath. Because I believe that everyone deserves dignity, no matter their circumstances. I saw firsthand how broken our system is, how patients like Daniel Grant were treated as burdens instead of people. This foundation is about changing that. The interview aired to overwhelming support, and the tide began to turn. Donations surged, and the foundation's reputation was restored. But more importantly, I'd found my voice and the courage to use it. As the media storm settled, Daniel and I found ourselves closer than ever. Late nights in the office turned into quiet moments of connection, and I began to realize how much he meant to me. Not just as a partner, but as a man. One evening, as we walked through the gardens of his estate, he stopped suddenly, turning to face me. "Rachel," he said, his voice soft but steady. "There's something I need to tell you." My heart pounded. "What is it?" He hesitated, his expression vulnerable. "I didn't just offer you this job because I was grateful. I did it because I believe in you, and because care about you more than I should." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I searched his face, seeing nothing but sincerity in his eyes. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. "Say you feel the same," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And I did. From that moment on, our relationship evolved into something deeper. We worked side by side, not just as colleagues but as partners in every sense of the word. Together, we expanded the foundation, opening facilities across the country and transforming countless lives. But the real transformation was in me. The timid nurse who had once been the target of ridicule was now a leader, a force to be reckoned with. And it was all because one man believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Years later, as I stood on the stage of the Foundation's annual gala, I looked out at the crowd. A sea of faces filled with hope and gratitude. Daniel was in the front row, his eyes shining with pride. "This foundation started as a dream," I said, my voice steady. "A dream to create a world where every patient is treated with dignity. But it's become so much more than that. It's proof that kindness, compassion, and determination can change the world." The applause was deafening, but my focus was on Daniel. He stood, his smile lighting up the room, and in that moment, I knew that everything we had built together was just the beginning.